Hey guys, it's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another video. Welcome back to a video with the microphone. I do like the microphone and I have a fun time with it, so she's back for today. But today we have a little bit of a different one. I'm going to be doing a non-fiction reading vlog. Actually, I don't know why I said reading vlog because I don't think it counts as a reading vlog. Basically, in this video, I have read the almost entirety of the Goodreads Choice Awards from 2024 non-fiction list, and I'm basically going to be going through, sharing my thoughts, reviewing them, and letting you guys know which ones I think are worth your time. I've tried to shake this video up a little bit, make it a bit more interesting and dynamic visually. I am not just sit here talking the whole time. I'm definitely going to be moving about a bit and hopefully making it a little bit more engaging. So I would love to know whether you guys enjoyed this format of content, kind of sat with a microphone, or whether you preferred it kind of right after I finish each book, reviewing it and let you know what I think. I do think it kind of is a balance for non-fiction. Obviously it's good to review things kind of immediately, but then maybe some thoughts can kind of sit for a bit and I can compare a bit more if I've read the whole list. So do let me know what you think. But I am going to be reading today all of the books on the best nonfiction of 2024 list. So there are 20. I'll put them up on the screen here now. I will say before going into it, there are 6 on this list that I am not reading, and then 2 on here that I DNF'd. So I've read 12 books, but I will just quickly run through the ones that I'm not going to be reading for different reasons. First things first, One by Gillian Anderson. I know this was a super popular one, but actually looking at the reviews, it's quite low. This is basically a collection of sexual fantasies, I believe, or sexual stories collected by Gillian Anderson and put into this kind of book, and that's just not my type of thing that I would enjoy. I like reading smut and stuff when it's in the context of a romance book, but I just think in general as a non-fiction, that doesn't intrigue me at all. I don't think I would enjoy it. It's also not really related to Gillian Anderson at all. It's just that she's collated these stories. Plus, one, I don't want to buy this book and I don't really want to have it sitting on my shelves, and therefore I think it would be a waste. And secondly, I don't like, especially even with romance books, listening to anything sexual because I just feel a bit icky about it. No hate, no shade to anyone who does. That's just not my vibe, so I'm not going to be reading that. The Backyard Bird Chronicles, I could not access the audio form, and the same for All in Her Head and One in a Millennial. I was interested in all of these reasonably, but I just couldn't access the audiobook, and the physical books were quite expensive, and I just thought it would be a little bit of a waste given that most of the time I enjoy my non-fiction books by audio, so to give them the best chance it would be audibly listened to. Plus, All in Her Head I felt was a little bit similar to Blood, I'm Sorry for My Loss and stuff like that. One in a Millennial didn't speak to me entirely as I'm not a millennial. The Backyard Bird Chronicles I think could have been cute, but unfortunately I couldn't access it. And then finally 2 more. The Devil at His Elbow, I had no way to access this. It wasn't even available on my Amazon. And the same with The Kingdom, the Power and the Glory. I literally couldn't find this anywhere besides a £20 copy that was used or something. I was just a bit confused by that. So apologies for that going in. I realize that's not the most exciting ways to intro a video. However, the rest of these I am really, really excited for. I have tried to divide them up into categories to talk about. So we'll split up this video into those categories. They start off making sense. The others are kind of a bit more tenuously linked just because I was left with ones that are hard to link together. What can I say? But I really hope you guys do enjoy this. I'm hoping to do some more non-fiction videos. I won't be overloading you because I know some people don't enjoy them. However, maybe once a month or so I'll do one, and it will be a bit like this, kind of a much longer video in terms of amount of books read. So if you do like the non-fiction content, there'll be a lot, but it's easy to also skip out on, and I won't be sacrificing other fiction videos that I know people do enjoy as well. So without further ado, I think let's just get straight into it, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, welcome to our first category, which is women, and I mean this in a general admiring sense. I am very, very much aware that not everyone who has a period is a woman, not everyone who gives birth is a woman, not all women have periods, etc, etc. I don't mean to exclude anyone. I mean it in the Joe from Little Women version. So this one has kind of 3 books. We do have 1 DNF in here, but I will start off with I'm Sorry for My Loss, just because I think Blood and Hysteria are kind of similar in terms of, at least more similar, I guess, in theme. So I'm Sorry for My Loss, written by Rebecca Little and Colleen Long. I really, really, really love this one. I thought this was an absolutely excellent book. I listened to this one as well. I decided to give it a 4.5. I thought this one was super, super strong. It made me very angry to read. It's definitely an infuriating one. This one basically kind of follows both of their personal experience with pregnancy loss, and also talks a lot about kind of the history of abortion in the United States, with obviously a strong kind of focus on the overturning of Roe v. Wade. This was just a really, really excellent book. Firstly, they both narrate it, which I think is really good. They both kind of talk quite openly about their personal experiences, which I thought was super duper interesting. Very, very sad, don't get me wrong, and I definitely think this is the type of book that I think if you have experienced something like this and you're quite sensitive to it, I would probably say to skip, just because they talk a lot kind of about personal stories in detail, and I can definitely understand why that would maybe be difficult for some people. I would kind of go in with that warning. However, I think they are both excellent writers and narrators. They do narrate it themselves, and I think it's very, very powerful. Obviously, this and kind of the other books in here as well kind of cover topics that are very much, I guess, neglected. I think societally, we don't see a lot of people talking about this, which is really, really frustrating, because I think it very much makes it like a taboo topic when it's not. Like, it affects so many people, and I didn't know before this how kind of common it is, not necessarily to have a late term loss, but definitely to have an earlier term one. And yeah, I think kind of talking a lot about that overturning of Roe v. Wade, as terrible as it is, I do think is important, because I think it's definitely because of the taboo around it, which I obviously don't agree with. I think that has definitely been kind of weaponized by people who are wanting to take away rights from women, and the fact that they can kind of just spread misinformation and people aren't informed enough because of the taboo to kind of be able to distinguish between rumors, misrepresented statistics, stuff like that. They don't know the true facts. It also kind of takes a bit of an intersectional approach as well, talking a lot about how like black women of color are so much more likely to die in childbirth than white women, which is insane in the 21st century. I thought this was just really, really worth the listen. The kind of tagline is an urgent examination of reproductive care in America, and I do think it almost kind of does very much feel urgent, because I think we are just kind of taking huge steps backwards, which is absolutely terrifying. I think this is really, really worth a listen. Anyone who has the headspace for it, I would 1000% recommend this to. It's super informative as well as being super personal, which is something I really enjoy in my nonfiction. I love not necessarily memoirs, but this one is woven in really well. It's not like a memoir, it's only kind of like snippets of personal experience that are relevant. I really kind of felt very connected to both of these women, even though I don't know them. I guess that's kind of just like a female type of connection when you can just very easily kind of see yourself in these positions, because they're just extremely common for a lot of people. It's absolutely infuriating kind of seeing the history of it as well. I think especially in America, I had no idea, and I think that's not just like from a European perspective. I do think that's from a generalized worldview perspective. I think this is worth reading even if you're outside Americas, because obviously I am as well, and obviously it kind of very much is focused on North America, United States. However, I think everyone could benefit from reading this, and it was super duper informative. Obviously upsetting at times, like absolutely infuriating, but I do still definitely think worth the listen. A very, very high recommendation from me. This is not one that I'd heard about prior to the awards, so I'm really glad that this kind of made me pick it up. It's a bit of a longer one. I think it's like 480 pages or so I enjoyed the audiobook. Most of these I did listen to via audio. So then moving on, we will talk about the little DNF. And to be fair, with Blood and Hysteria. Oh, sorry, it's not Hysteria. I feel like both of these were quite similar. I feel like you probably wouldn't need to read both of these, and I didn't. I did end up DNFing It's Not Hysteria. Both of these are reasonably similar. They are both talking about menstruation and women's health, and again, I'm using women for ease. I also appreciate that both of these authors, both Rebecca Little, Connie Long, and Dr. Jen Gunter, they were very specific in the fact that obviously acknowledging that not all women have periods. It's important to acknowledge, and I think a lot of people don't sometimes. So It's Not Hysteria, I felt like was very factual. It felt more like it didn't necessarily like link chapters together, and this is why I DNF'd. I think I got about 15-20% of the way through, and this one was kind of like issue, talk about it, issue, talk about it, and the issues would be like PCOS and then like endometriosis and stuff like that, and a lot of stuff was getting quite specific in a way that I kind of felt like I obviously am interested in this in the general sense, but I don't feel like I need to know the medical minutiae of something that doesn't personally affect me. And I don't mean that in a like it's not relevant to me, I don't care, just in a way of like I wouldn't need to know the medical minutiae of like appendicitis unless I thought I had appendicitis, if that makes sense. And where I think it kind of differed slightly from Blood, I felt like there was a bit more of the author's voice in there, which I appreciated. Blood does do a similar thing where we are kind of going through talking about different issues, different kind of contraceptions. We talk a lot about the history of certain contraceptions, like we talk about the history of the IUD, which I had absolutely no knowledge about. She is very factual in this, but I do think her strong perspective for women's rights and bodily autonomy comes across, and I do appreciate that. Dr. Jenkins herself is a gynecologist, and she's clearly very informed and knows what she's talking about. It is a longer book, but I think she is a good audiobook narrator. It kind of almost felt like a university lecturer kind of talking to a small group of people, if that makes sense, and I liked that. This is so niche, but a couple of times, because I was listening with my noise cancelling headphones, you can almost hear in the recording her like moving her papers over, and for me, sounds like such a random thing. That was like ASMR to me. I found it so relaxing, and it kind of almost made me pay more attention because I did kind of feel like she was talking to me, if that makes sense. I liked it. We kind of talked about a good amount, I think, of topics. She was kind of able to give a couple of asides, kind of sharing if she's talking about the history of the IUD and it's all about men, and like female reproductive parts are named after the men who kind of discover them, or the people that kind of named the diseases, which is insane. And she mentions like a little aside, she'll be like, oh, sigh, whatever, and I think it kind of shows some of her personality through that. She's clearly very patient focused, so she's not biased in her information. However, if there is a slight slant, it's towards what's good for the patient, if that makes sense. She's very much not kind of talking about preconceived notions, stuff like that. Like I said, it's quite long. She talks about a lot of different stuff, but I definitely thought this was super informative and engaging. And I think for me, It's Not Hysteria was just kind of missing that engaging aspect for me. So I personally would recommend Blood over It's Not Hysteria. I can understand why some people would maybe want more just like facts, and I didn't get the whole way through, so I can't talk too much on that. I do think It's Not Hysteria talks a little bit more about medical problems, whereas Blood is a little bit more focused on menstruation itself. So the medical problems that it will talk about are kind of like fibroids, endometriosis, whereas if I'm recalling correctly, I think It's Not Hysteria talks a little bit more about like gynecological health in general, so like fertility, urinary conditions, stuff like that. And I think it's kind of framed this way. It's more like a kind of comprehensive guide, whereas like the tagline of Blood is like the science, medicine and mythology of menstruation. So I think it kind of depends what you're looking for, but for me personally, I think Blood was really good. Kind of talks a little bit on politics, misinformation, myth busting, stuff like that. I thought it was super duper informative. This was another really good one. I've got to say, I decided to give this one a 4 stars. I thought it was really great. Like I said, I did DNF It's Not Hysteria. It wasn't personally piquing my interest, and I could definitely understand why some people would enjoy it. That is our first category. A couple of the other ones are a bit more tenuously long. Let's move into our next category. Okay, so moving on to our second category, we have psychology-ish type of thing. So we have Feel Good Productivity, The Anxious Generation, and Meditations for Mortals. So 2 of these are pretty short, and I would maybe more actually put into the self-help genre, but I was desperate to make these categories, okay? So like, let it freaking be, okay? So let's start off with Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal. So Ali is a YouTuber, I believe. So I think he was a doctor and then kind of like study YouTuber / productivity tuber type situation. He wrote this book basically on productivity and kind of feel good productivity, which in his words is like making your work fun and stuff like that. So I definitely think that this is a useful book. I mean, I am diagnosed with ADHD, so these tips don't necessarily apply to me. I feel a little bit awkward kind of rating this. I decided to give it like a 3.75. It's a short one. Like in terms of actual book, it's only like 300 pages. I think maybe the audiobook is like 8 hours or something like that. It is a pretty short one, but I do think that Ali is a very good like narrator. I think you can tell that he's kind of worked on YouTube videos. He has kind of a good speaking to an audience voice. I think this is similar to John Green. I think they are able to kind of just narrate things very well. I think that does come from being a YouTuber. I'm not trying to like hype myself up in this category, but I think when you're kind of a more, I guess, education based YouTuber, I'm realizing now that I don't actually think I've watched John Green's YouTube videos. I love that man, but I don't think I've actually watched them, so I don't actually know what he does. But that type of vibe, I think you kind of develop a skill of talking to people on a more kind of like casual level than a regular audiobook, if that makes sense. And obviously these are his words that he's written, and I do believe it is his words. I don't think it's like a ghostwriter type of situation. I think he's good at narrating it. He kind of does a couple little sides and stuff, which I think is good. Yeah, I think he's just kind of good at getting this information across and sounding enthusiastic and stuff like that. So he kind of talks about a few hacks in this. He talks about kind of like making things fun, kind of like writing absolutely everything you have to do out in a list, breaking tasks down, the 5-minute rule, stuff like that. And I definitely think some of that is helpful, and I do think even to me some of that is helpful as well. So I do think you would be able to take something away from this. I think the trouble is, for me, I guess it's similar to Atomic Habits, but I do think Atomic Habits was more so like the precursor to this. You are not going to find anything completely unique in this book that you can't find for free on YouTube. I feel the same way, and this is by no means in the same category. Productivity courses and stuff like that, almost all of this information is already online somewhere for free, and I do think you will be able to find it for free. So I don't think, if you've already kind of like been watching a ton of YouTube videos on productivity stuff like that, like I don't know whether you would get super useful stuff out of this. However, like I listened to it with my Spotify subscription, it didn't take long, and I thought it was reasonably enjoyable. I definitely think it's better than kind of some generic productivity advice that I've got. It's kind of like just focused on like making things fun for yourself, I guess. I gave it a 3.75. I don't have tons to say about this type of thing because I do think it falls into self-help a little bit, and that's just not my forte or kind of genre of choice. But like overall, I do think it's an enjoyable book. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It was okay. The actual book in and of itself and kind of like the whole space around it, I guess, is not something that particularly appeals to me. However, like the actual content for what it is, I do think is reasonably useful. It's a little bit more than just the generic stuff as well, which I appreciate. And then moving on, let's kind of skip over to Meditations for Mortals. So this one I do feel a little bit bad about, because he kind of says at the start that you're meant to like read one chapter a day or so and kind of focus on like weekly stuff, and I obviously kind of listened to this audiobook all in one go. So I obviously didn't get the kind of desired experience out of it that kind of he is intending, and I do think that is fine, and I did kind of factor that into my review. I tried not to kind of like take that as like a criticism of the book. I was very much understanding that this is not kind of the way it's intending. Basically in this, he's trying to say that you need to kind of use your time in ways that benefit you. So the kind of tagline is 4 weeks to embrace your limitations and make time for what counts. Like I like that mindset and I do appreciate that, but like I don't know whether I need like a full book to kind of delve into that. I mean, it is reasonably short. The audiobook's short and the actual book's like 200 pages. I gave it a 3.5, and I think that was more so just like, it's good, I like what you're saying, but the actual actionable tips, I guess, aren't really applicable to me, I guess. I thought it was fine. I think this is one of the books that I have kind of retained the least about. I feel like it was kind of like in one ear out the other. I didn't necessarily gain much from it. I think it's a lot about kind of like taking small actions every day to kind of like live the life that you want to live, and not kind of like put things off into the future, living with imperfectionism, and not kind of like waiting for the perfect moment, stuff like that. For me personally, I guess similar to the book before, but maybe like slightly less useful than the book before, I do think someone could get a lot out of this. I think kind of the traditional kind of stuck in a corporate role, no time for personal life, I feel like this could be really useful, but this is just one that I don't really have a ton to say about because it's kind of what it is, and I don't even necessarily think that I followed what it was like intended to be, if that makes sense. None of this was revolutionary or groundbreaking to me, but then again, I feel like I have a reasonably kind of like relaxed view of the world. I'm not driven by work particularly. I'm very much already kind of like an experiences driven person. I just don't really know if I have a lot more to say about this, but some people have really enjoyed it. Like it's got a 4.29 on Goodreads. I think that's definitely like a good rating. I don't really have anything else to say, so let's move on to the winner actually of the category. The Anxious Generation has a lot of controversy around it. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Jonathan Haidt, in one of the paragraphs, he kind of says some weird stuff about gender identity, where he kind of says that like a lot of it is social contagion theory, and I think a lot of that has been taken out of context, because he's not saying like people are trans because other people are trans and they see it online. Like obviously we know that gender identity is completely different. I struggle because like I don't agree with a lot of the stuff he's saying, but I do think that like maybe he deserves a tiny bit of the benefit of the doubt in the fact that kind of I do think seeing things online and kind of feeling a part of a community can make you more comfortable in your identity, and I do think that can kind of make you more forward with it, if that makes sense, more free to come out and stuff like that, and I think that's important. I don't know whether that's what he was saying or whether he was saying something a lot worse, but I do definitely agree that kind of like online communities can create safe spaces where people can learn about themselves, and I think that's super duper important. Again, not sure if that was his point, but I do think that's why it's got a lot of controversy, and I will say that is kind of just one part of a paragraph in the whole book. Like the whole book isn't this like anti-trans rhetoric, though I will say I don't agree with a lot of Jonathan Haidt's other views, so I'm not sure how much benefit of the doubt I should give him, but I do want to say that outright. But to put that aside, because that's at least what I heard a lot about this book, so I did want to address that. Basically, I thought this book was going to be a lot more interesting than it was. So the kind of tagline of this is how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. And I was like, wow, this is going to be really interesting. And it wasn't. Basically, I think I gave this like a 3.5. I think that maybe felt a little bit generous, but I do think like he raises some good points in terms of like everyone's on social media at schools. Social media is obviously very, very damaging for mental health. And I think that's quite obvious. Social media addiction is also very bad. And I think if he'd kind of have focused on those aspects, I think he could have delved in really well with kind of interviews, with scientific study, stuff like that. I thought it could be really, really interesting. In this, he's basically kind of putting forward his hypothesis that if there are no phones at school, children are given more freedom and they have a play-based childhood instead of a phone-based childhood, then everything will be fixed. This is a very narrow point of view. First things first, I think no phones in schools, like I do think that's a good thing. The kind of main issue that I have, like he tells a story, I think he lives in New York, about how his son was stranded somewhere and he had no phone at like age 10 or something, and he like got the subway home by himself and figured it out. And I was like, that's really great that happened, but like you can't just like then apply that to everyone and be like, everyone would just be fine if they were stranded somewhere. Because like, I'm really sorry, but like if I have children, I'm not letting them walk around at like age 8. I think he says like from the ages of like 6 or 7 they should start like going places by themselves. And I understand like in some cases, yeah, but like some people don't want their children to be kidnapped, and I'm not saying that if you let your children have freedom you're wanting them to be kidnapped, but I do think there are a lot of dangers here. And I do think there is obviously a place, he talks a lot about kind of like overprotective parenting and stuff like that, and not letting children do stuff for themselves. I understand that aspect, but he literally doesn't even talk ever so slightly about like just the risks to children. There's also risks to children online, but like I do think in real life there are a lot of risks to children. Like if we think about like the 70s and 80s, again, I don't know if this is just like a generalization, but like kids are talking about everything all the time. All of them like kidnapping cases, children serial killers. I understand like obviously there's a serial killer, this is such a canon, but like I understand there's a serial killers now because the modern evidence you can catch before like they start developing more, but they start killing more of them. But like there's a lot of children kidnapped in the 70s where they're walking out by themselves. I'm sorry. I feel like we are maybe glossing over the fact that like the world isn't safe a lot of the time. And again, he talks about this a little bit, and he very much has the kind of, I guess, mindset that like people are overprotective and the world isn't as dangerous as people think it is. I do think it can be, and I think it's really situationally dependent. It's definitely not a all-encompassing solution, and I'm not saying he has to kind of flesh it out to the nth degree and kind of like figure out how we're going to fix this massive problem, but I do think like there could have been a little more nuance there that there wasn't. Sorry if I'm talking a little bit vaguely, because I did read this one kind of nearer the start. I just thought there was going to be a little bit more kind of delving into like how social media causes anxiety, how phone addiction can like really damage people. Maybe this is a book that maybe could come out in 5 or 10 years and just delve a little bit more into, because I think Gen Alpha is going to be really, really interesting with COVID, with social media, attention spans, illiteracy. I think that would be a really interesting angle to tackle, and I appreciate that this came out in like 2023, so obviously like that's not something I would have expected him to cover in this book. It's a little bit of a generalization. I would have preferred it if it went down a little bit of a different route. I felt like the author, he came across a little bit pretentious and a little bit kind of like talking down. A lot of the stuff he was saying was a bit like, well, yeah, obviously. Could have just delved into it a little bit more, maybe, I think. So I gave it a 3.5. I don't think it was like a, this should never have been published type of situation. I just think it didn't really have a lot of oomph and wasn't walking away from it feeling like, yeah, let's tackle this issue, or like that I'd learned tons. I was a little bit surprised that this had won, but then I guess with nonfiction, I think a lot of people are voting for stuff they've heard about or stuff they've read, and this was like the most read, most spoken about one. So let's move on to our next category. I feel like that was like a little bit of a rant, but next category. Okay, next category. This one does make sense. True crime. There are only 2 books in here, so it's easier to link them together, but like this is one of my best links, I think, and it's a very obvious one. This one, I really enjoyed both these books. I also do hope that you appreciate the amount of effort I'm going to change things up visually. Obviously I'm filming this all at the same day, but I hope you guys appreciate it. Firstly, let's talk about Framed. This is by Jim McCluskey and John Grisham. So John Grisham's obviously a very famous fiction author for like kind of the generic kind of like grisly crime books, I believe. I've not read any of his fiction, and Jim McCluskey founded Centurion Ministries, which is a group in America devoted to overturning wrongful convictions. So these are both actually books about wrongful convictions. In Framed, basically the authors go back and forth and talk about 10 different kind of stories of wrongful conviction. What I like about this in the audiobook, and I think it's quite funny at the start, is that they're both narrating each of their parts. And in the introduction you go, this is John Grisham, and then it's like Jim McCluskey here. They're both talking about their parts, but they each narrate their own sections of the book, which I find interesting. They kind of alternate, and they have 5 stories each. each. I think on reflection, I can probably only remember like 3 or 4. These didn't necessarily stick super strongly with me, and I do think sometimes kind of wrongful conviction stories, this sounds really terrible, they can blend together ever so slightly. Obviously there are some major differences between them. It's definitely kind of interesting seeing the way things played out, but I don't want to delve too much into the next book. But I think for me personally, I'd rather kind of dive quite deeply into each story and kind of get to know the characters a little bit more. And that sounds wrong because obviously they're real life people, but getting to know a little bit in more detail would definitely kind of be my preferred way of engaging with this. I don't listen to really any true crime stuff, but the ones that I have kind of enjoyed, true crime novels, are kind of like deep dives, I guess, and you kind of really learn a lot about the people, whereas this one's more kind of like, I guess, flash in the pan kind of quick stories. I mean, it's like 300 and I think it says 68 pages, so I mean that's like 30-40 pages for each story, and again, story sounds wrong, each case. So I do think it misses out in that aspect, but I do think it's like interesting, and I think it definitely paints a strong picture of like a system that is just not working, and I think that's quite obvious for a lot of people. I mean, I'm not trying to say that like prison reform is super easy, so I'm just not going to get into that right now. It kind of talks about, obviously, a lot about kind of police misconduct and about racism and kind of the flawed justice system. They are kind of very, very prominent themes, as can probably be expected, and I definitely think it's interesting. I do think they did a good job. They did kind of pick a good amount of kind of different stories, like we follow groups of people, individual people. There is a mix in races. Obviously it does kind of focus predominantly on Black Americans and Black American men, so I think that is often people that are targeted by the police. Obviously we kind of know all about this anyway, I don't have to start going into it here, but that's not entirely surprising given the way the American police system acts. It's really, really a disappointing book, and not in the way it's written, just like to hear all of these stories, it's just disappointing. And obviously I know within any system there are going to be flaws, but like these flaws just feel very, very pronounced. Again, this was one that I read nearer the start of this project, and a lot of it has kind of like gone out of my mind, unfortunately. I feel like maybe if there was a overarching narrative, maybe they could come in between chapters and talk about more kind of theoretical stuff or political stuff, things like that. That might be a bit more interesting, and then it would kind of feel like it's got more of a point rather than just like, here are 10 stories. I did like it, but I think also then going on to read Sing Sing Files, which we'll talk about next, kind of made me like this one a little bit less, just because I like that one so much. Not to spoil ahead, I gave this one a 3.75. There was definitely nothing wrong with it, but just to my personal taste, I would then later go on to read something I much more enjoyed. So I do have a ton to say about the next one. Sing Sing Files was actually one of the less read ones on here. It's still only got 2,000 ratings on Goodreads, but I will say 4.49 as it should. I gave this one a 4.5. I thought this was excellent. I think firstly, just on an audiobook level, it's produced really, really well. I think especially for a book that like doesn't have a lot of readers, it wasn't like pushed tons. I didn't hear anything about this beforehand. It's a very well produced audiobook. There is a couple of little bits where they play music, we get some sound effects, there are some parts where people have written letters from prison, or they're talking about phone calls that happened between the author and people in prison, and you've got kind of like a phone sound effect, so it sounds a bit muffled, like they're on the phone. Certain people are narrating like the letters that they wrote, so it's very, very well produced as an audiobook. Talking more generally about the actual plot of the book, this is by Dan Slepian, who is a Dateline producer for NBC. He kind of wants to start producing this show because he got like a tip from a homicide detective about a potential case. 2 men were in prison serving 25 years, I think, for a crime that there was a lot of evidence saying that they didn't commit. He delves into this investigation that ends up taking like 2 decades, and along the way he kind of meets other people through this case and kind of is working with them as well. So we have this one main case where we're following JJ. He's in prison and we're kind of following him, and he's kind of working to help people from within the prison, and we're following him throughout, but then we also kind of delve into other people who have had similar kind of experiences with wrongful convictions. I thought this was really, really excellent. What I like about this, and I think is slightly similar to Framed, is we do cover different people, but what I was missing in Framed is we really, really delve in. We delve into these cases, we get to know these people, and it gets quite emotional. I feel like you really feel connected to the story. It's so frustrating hearing about the court system, how slow things are, how corrupt things are, all of the stuff involved. The journalism as well, I think Dan Slepian narrates it, and I think you can tell that he cares so much about about the people he's talking about, but he also is very good at telling a story. And I think that comes from probably being a producer on like a Dateline show where you really have to conduct a narrative, but there is a strong narrative throughout this, and I think it's just very, very well done, and I think very interesting. It wasn't overly long. The actual book itself is only 224 pages. The audiobook I think was maybe 8 hours long, and I think I listened to it on Everand. I don't have an Everand subscription anymore, but I think it was on there. If not, I'm pretty sure it's on Spotify as well. This is another one along with Sorry for My Loss. These are two very high recommendations for me. I think they are really, really excellent. I had not heard about either of them before this video, so those are very strong ones, and I really enjoyed it. As much as it's kind of like difficult to read at points and like upsetting and angering, I like the way everything kind of is brought together, and I think overall it's a very well written book. So yeah, strong review from me. I loved it as much as you can love a book that's not really the happiest in topics. So yeah, that is the last of our well grouped categories. So moving on to the next one. Hello, welcome to our fourth category, which is the very broad culture. Disney High really fits here. The message, not sure how to tell or die, maybe, but let's just go through these in the order they are in on the graphic. So first things first, How to Tell When We Will Die by Joanna Hedver. This one was interesting. I actually DNF'd this one originally, maybe about 30% of the way through, and then I thought for the sake of the video I would carry on, because I know there are a couple of these that I did DNF anyway. I just thought it was a harmless one to carry on, and I don't know if that's necessarily true in retrospect. I decided to give this one a 2.5. This is a essay collection. The tagline is on pain, disability and doom. So my perspective going into this was going to be some really interesting essays from the perspective of a disabled person, talking about kind of like coming to terms with maybe having a chronic illness, having a terminal illness, diagnosis, anything. I didn't know anything about Joanna Hedver before going into this. And then also probably some larger kind of essays on society, living with chronic pain, inaccessibility of society, and how ableist, like just generalized society is. That's kind of what I was expecting going into it, and I think the first few essays in this were really interesting. They talk a lot about their essay, I believe, Sick Woman Theory, which I think went quite viral online. I hadn't heard of it before. That's in here, and then we talk about some other stuff similar to that. And then there are certain points in this book where we go down a strong sexual route and we delve into their sex life. There's some stuff about kink in here, like some quite detailed things about their sex life, which is fine, just not what I really like reading about, especially in an audiobook form. I don't really like reading about that type of stuff, and I don't think it's because I'm a prude. I think if you have something to say about it, it can be really interesting. I'd love like an actual like book, like a non-fiction book on kind of the topic of sex in terms of like societally. I think that could be really interesting. I think the perspective of it from a disabled person, I think could also be incredibly interesting. That's not the problem with it. It's just like very detailed stuff that just didn't really, I think, fit with the initial tone or topic that I thought the book was going to be going into it. They come across from a lot of their actions that they talk about as quite self-entitled slightly, and just maybe not someone that I would necessarily get along with. I don't agree with all of their kind of takes on situations and stuff like that. There's one where they have like a sexual encounter with someone that they then refer to throughout the book as the freak, and they don't call this person back, but then kind of like almost spot them every time they're out and like take pictures of them to show their friends and be like, oh my god, look, they're here, and then they become like obsessed with them a bit. And it's just kind of odd, that essay being in the middle of like a book called How to Tell When We All Die, kind of with a tagline about disability. Also, at times they'll be making some quite profound points, I think, and quite interesting stuff. They were talking about, I can't remember who it was exactly that was like really inspiring to them. I think it was maybe Susan Sontag or something, I don't remember. And they're like making some really interesting points, and then they end it off with like, yeah, that's why she's my daddy. And it's like, oh, okay, fine. I feel like there's like a level of unseriousness but still pretentiousness there, which is interesting, and I don't want to like hark on this. They've clearly experienced a lot, and like some of these essays are really, really interesting, and like this book hasn't got a lot of ratings. It's only got 890, but I just think I wanted a different book from what this is. This seems like a very like quite personal collection of essays, and I think it's almost more memoir-like and would kind of do better with a more kind of personal toned publication and like marketing. It's very much framed as kind of like essays on disability, care, illness, society, stuff like that, which I don't think there's a lot of in here. And I think a lot of these essays as well, even the ones that I thought were really interesting, I feel like there wasn't really a point. It wasn't very clear what they were trying to say with it. There wasn't a strong kind of narrative or point running through it, and I think I do quite like that from my essay collections. I don't read a lot of essay collections because I often can get a little bit confused and just I feel like I disengage a bit when I feel like there's not like an overall point. The only one that I have really enjoyed was the Anthropocene Reviewed, and I think that's a lot more direct to reader, so that's why I like that one a lot. But yeah, with essay collections, like random topics that aren't necessarily like linking well together or like having an overarching narrative, because I thought this would with the disability focus, but I don't think it did. I think that's where it kind of lost it for me. I definitely think there are people that could enjoy this. There are like plenty of 5-star reviews. I just think for me this is not in any way, shape or form like the book that I am interested in or kind of looking for. And I'm not trying to say that I didn't want a book on disability by a disabled person to not focus on them, that's ridiculous, but just I can't lie, the sexual aspects really threw me off. Like it was really like quite jarring to read in my opinion, I can't lie, especially because there was going from like the like lack of funding in society and like terrible things and then like kinky sex, and it's like, oh, that's cool. I'm a bit confused now, and I can't lie, that is really what threw me off a lot in this. So yeah, I didn't read One for a reason. Do you know what I mean? It's just like not my vibe. Even One, if I had read it, I would know what I was going in for. This like completely came out of left field. I was not expecting it at all. I feel like I've really gone in on this and I feel bad because it's got so few reviews and stuff, but it was just an interesting one and not for me. Moving on to better things and happier things, we have Disney High, which I really enjoyed. So this was one that I had heard about before going into this. It was one of the few actually. I'd heard of The Anxious Generation and I think maybe that was it. I can't lie, I had not heard of a lot of these going in. I was so excited for this one. This was the first one I read because I was just literally so excited for it. I gave this one a 4, probably could be a 4.5, I think. I love this. This was so much fun. So the audiobook of this is narrated by, I believe, the girl who plays the best friend in Lizzie McGuire. I was born in 2002, so I am a little bit late to this era. It does start a little bit before I was getting into Disney, so I do think for me personally it would have been a 5 if we worked slightly later, but like I can absolutely understand why it was the kind of early days, if that makes sense. So in this we basically go from the start of Disney Channel when it was like just, I think it was like Mickey's Clubhouse, where it had like Britney on it, and then how they kind of turned it into like Hannah Montana, Lizzie McGuire, stuff like that with like the like teen stars. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was so interesting. We go through it in chronological order, starting with Hilary Duff, obviously from Lizzie McGuire, going into Raven Simone, and then we also have a good amount of time on High School Musical, which I love because that was about when I was getting into Disney. We go through both High School Musical 1 and 2, I believe, and it's really fun to see Ashley Spencer, the author. She's like interviewed people that were on set working in it. She's not got interviews with like Selena Gomez or Miley Cyrus or anything like that, but it is so fun to see and also so fun to hear about, obviously, all the stuff that was going on in the background. It's not like a tell-all type of thing, it's more kind of like the inner workings. She talks a lot in here to kind of people who worked at the studio and was kind of explaining the background decisions and stuff that were being made. We also kind of go through the Jonas Brothers, Demi Lovato, and I think kind of up to like Wizards of Waverly Place era ending, maybe like the start of kind of like Shake It Up era, if that makes sense. So kind of like what a lot of people consider the golden age, but I was still continuing watching a little bit later, like Shake It Up, Ant Farm, like Liv and Maddie, and then after that I kind of stopped watching because I'd grown out of it. But I'm ever so slightly shifted past this point, so I think for me personally the most interesting stuff was the stuff near the end, which is stuff I remember. Honestly, if you're like 2 years older than me, so I think if you're born like in 2000, then this is like your perfect Disney book because it's like that exact era. That didn't stop me from enjoying it whatsoever. I think in general, kind of like cultural books like this, any type of book that kind of gives a little glimpse into the background of stuff like this is super interesting. Honestly, I love this. I was such a Disney kid. I was absolutely obsessed with Wizards of Waverly Place, and I think you would definitely enjoy it more the more into Disney you were, if that makes sense. So if you never really watched Disney as a kid, I don't think this is the book for you, but I think even if you like engaged with it and only watched like High School Musical and some Hannah Montana, like I still think you could really enjoy this. I thought it was great. I thought it was really well put together. It seemed really well researched. The audiobook was really well narrated, because obviously it's narrated by an actress. Ashley Spencer seems to like really care a lot and be really interested in it herself, so that also makes it more interesting to read. And I definitely think this one is also one that could be easily read physically. A lot of nonfiction sometimes I think can be a little bit dry, and when they're spoken it kind of brings them to life a bit more. I'm just thinking maybe about like The Anxious Generation, which I know I didn't love anyway, but also even Blood. I think some of them could have been slightly, ever so slightly dry to read just due to their length. However, the actual like narration and stuff really brings it to life and makes it engaging, whereas this one I think would be engaging on the page. I also think if you watch Lizzie McGuire, you'll love that the actress from The Best Friend is narrating it. I loved it. I think this is a strong recommendation. I think a lot of people would like it, and it was a great one. It definitely deserves more kind of reads. I think this would be potentially a good one to kind of jump into if you've not read a lot of nonfic either, especially if you like Disney. It will talk about something that you're interested in. It's almost like behind the scenes stuff, so I think it would be very enjoyable to anyone who likes Disney me growing up. Lastly, moving on to the message. So I don't really know if this fits into culture. I think it kind of does, but like I'm really trying to like push it together. My problem with this, I did like it. First of all, I want to say I gave this one a 3.5. I thought it was good. It is a shorter one as well, and it is narrated by the author, which I always think is a positive for me. My problem is I don't think it had a strong message, which is ironic given the title of the book. Thought it was interesting. I thought Ta-Nehisi Coates is clearly a good writer. In this, he kind of travels to Senegal, to Columbia, South Carolina, and then to Palestine, and it's kind of like 3 essays kind of like linked together with the same kind of themes branching across them. In the first one, I believe he's kind of talking about the legacy of slavery in Senegal. I really don't remember. I feel so bad. This one's kind of left my mind a bit as well, unfortunately. I just didn't find it super gripping. In the second essay, he is in South Carolina, and there's like a teacher there who wants to kind of teach his books, but they're being banned or something, talking about following Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, banning books, things like that. That's kind of discussed in there. And then the third one is the most interesting, I think, potentially because it's the most culturally relevant right now, but he talks about Palestine, and this is really interesting because I believe this was published on the 1st of October 2024, so I'm not sure how much of this was written before or after the genocide started, and I think there's like parts that were written before and then maybe other bits that are kind of like tagged on after, but it's really interesting him going there before and talking about the occupied territories. It's quite eerie almost, given that you know what's going to happen very soon after he visits. I don't know whether it's a lack of memory or a lack of feeling super engaged with the book. I don't know what it was because I can't think of anything off the top of my head that was super wrong with it. I don't know maybe whether it was just because there wasn't a strong connecting narrative. Reading off of the Goodreads description, it says he initially set off to write a book about writing but found himself grappling with deeper questions about how our stories, our reporting and imaginative narratives and myth making expose and distort our realities. So I guess kind of can be linked to like the concepts of the way language is used, but I didn't really feel like that was coming across strongly. I can get the disillusionment in Senegal because I believe he's talking about how he kind of imagined it as kind of like a mythical place, and then he visits and it's quite modern. In the second essay, Banning Books, which is obviously talking about the power of language, and then also in Palestine, imaginative narratives and stuff, narratives that are being pushed, I guess can kind of be related to that. I don't know whether it was a lack of like my fault that I just didn't feel super engaged with it, and I didn't feel like I really got the message of the message, if you know what I mean. I gave it a 3.5. Like I mentioned, it's got a 4.52 on Goodreads, so like clearly a lot of people love it. The reviews are filled with 5 stars, so like I think probably it's me that's the problem in this one. I just don't know whether it's just not my vibe in terms of writing style or what. This is the one that like I feel most insecure about reviewing, because like I can see like objectively that it is probably very good, but like none of it really clicked with me, if that makes sense. And it wasn't the content, I think it was maybe more the style. I feel insecure reviewing this one because I feel like I'm not smart enough maybe, or just like missing something. So let's move on, because I feel like I've rambled about this one as well. I don't have like proper conclusive thoughts, so let's move forward. Okay, this is definitely like my poorest excuse of a visual change so far. I've literally shifted the camera like maybe 1 singular centimeter, and I've put on my glasses. So you can tell I'm getting a little bit tired by the end of this video. Like in the first clip, I was like full on changing my top. If you're at this point, I presume you're just kind of interested in the nonfiction, you don't really mind. So moving on to our final category. This is science and society. So maybe you're thinking society fits more in culture. Why were some of these not in psychology? Why are some of these not like in a more political category? Look, Queenie, I'm just trying to do an even distribution. I'm trying really hard. So let's move on. First things first, we have Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg, I believe. This one was interesting. I feel like my whole time listening to this, I couldn't tell whether I thought it was really interesting or really odd. Basically in this, he is talking about the kind of like science and psychology, I guess, behind like communicating well, like people that can really steer a conversation, lead, I guess, discussions, convince people of their viewpoints, kind of talking about difficult topics well, not like isolating people, and also being able to kind of like put people at ease and kind of get them to open up. And he's basically kind of delving into this on a more psychological level. He talks about a lot of case studies, which I do enjoy. I love a case study in a book, and he's basically trying to give tips on how to communicate better, and not just kind of communicate well, but kind of like communicate in like an above average way, if that makes sense. He talks in here a lot about kind of like matching people's energy and emotions, and like if they are kind of sharing something, you should share something too, that if they're looking upset, you should like look upset too, and stuff like that. You like match their openness and stuff, and there's obviously case studies that back this up. And like on that level, that kind of feels a little bit manipulative manipulative to me. And like, I'm not trying to say that he is a manipulative person or anyone doing this is manipulative, but I think because I'm quite an open person anyway, if I felt like someone was just matching my energy to make me then open up more, I would feel a little bit deceived. But then we kind of delve into a deeper theoretical discussion on like, what are the goals of any conversation? Is anyone talking to you for anything but their own benefit? Is everyone just like waiting for you to finish what you're saying so they can say something else, like blah 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 blah? To be honest, I don't really care about that. He kind of talks about, I think if you have a harder conversation and like maybe kind of more professional stuff, it could be useful. He talks a lot about having like goals for conversations before you go into it, also like repeating what you've heard, like what people are saying kind of back to them almost. And yeah, like it's definitely interesting, I think, as a book, but if you're actually going to like take this advice and use it, it does kind of sit slightly funny to me. And again, like it's not really a big deal because I'm sure people are doing this all the time. Like I think one of those biggest non-fiction books is like How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I don't think badly of anyone who like wants to like take the advice in this book, but like it does always just feel a little bit manipulative. I don't care too much about it, so like I'm not gonna like sit here and rant about how it's like wrong, because I don't think it is, but like it just like raises an interesting question, I think, and that's where I'm kind of going to leave that. I gave it a 3.5. I did really appreciate kind of like the use and kind of bringing up scientific case studies and stuff, and they talked about that, which was like really quite interesting. He kind of talks about a CIA operative who was like able to like win over a spy member of the jury, kind of convincing other jurors to like change their, I guess, decision, their vote. It was definitely interesting. Like it's not stand out of the list, you know what I mean? Like I thought it was okay. I'm probably not really going to think about it again. I don't think I needed to read it. It was very inoffensive, but just kind of like middle of the road for me in terms of like actual quality book. Do you know what I mean? Then moving on to Revenge of the Tipping Point, which is our final DNF of the video, unfortunately. So my biggest pet peeve with books is when the author presumes that I know who they am or that I've read their previous books, especially in terms of like non-fiction. If it's not a sequel, like I don't care. And I do understand that this is in reference to his book Tipping Point, which Revenge of the Tipping Point, yeah, maybe like it could be conceived that you should read the first one, but like I don't think it's very difficult to maybe discuss in the introduction like what you talked about in the first book. And I think otherwise, I'm not trying to get ranty, but like I do think it comes across as quite pretentious to just presume everyone's read, especially as it came out 20 years ago, read and like retained all the information from your first book, because he referenced it quite a lot. And I do think I read maybe 10% and I was like, okay, I'm not reading this because I'm not reading the first one. I think I also had maybe a misconception going in, because when I hear tipping point, I think of like climate change, because I think that's how it's often referred to. So I thought Revenge of the Tipping Point was going to be a little bit about kind of climate change. And the tagline of this, let me get this right, it says over stories, super spreaders, and the rise of social engineering. So I even thought that could be related to climate change in more of a social way as well. So that's what I thought going into it. And then he starts talking about different tipping points, and I don't really understand what he means. I'm pulling this from the Goodreads description. It says he traces the rise of a new and troubling form of social engineering, talking about, he talks about bank robbers and like how certain things led to it being easier for these bank robbers, and like they were doing it in New York and then they went to LA to do it as well or something. And yeah, like he's talks about social academics and tipping points with the aim of explaining the darker side of contagious phenomena, and I felt like I just don't know what you're talking about. And he was talking about the bank robbers for a while, and I was like, okay, interesting, where are we going to go with this? And then that kind of ended and he started talking about something else completely different, and I was honestly just sat there feeling so confused. And like I definitely understand, like I probably should have read the first book, but what? I don't understand what you're talking about. What do you mean a tipping point of like a social epidemic? Like I feel like you are just spouting buzzwords here. Like you didn't even define what you mean. And in this, it says this time it's like explaining the dark side of this and that. You would then think that there would be at least kind of a more conclusive definition of what you mean by this information, and I just feel like there wasn't. And to be fair, giving the book the benefit of the doubt, I DNF'd it at 10%. So it definitely could have got more explained, but I feel like if at the start I was feeling that confused and there was just a presumption of like a baseline understanding, which I didn't have because I hadn't read the first book, and like maybe I would read the first book at some point, at some time. Like it doesn't sound disinteresting to me, but just this second one, like right here, right now, I'm not going to read that, and I didn't want to read an extra book for this video. This was also nominated in the favorite audiobook category, which I thought was a little bit rogue. I would love to read a book about climate change, super spreaders, and social engineering in that context. I think that could be really, really interesting. So maybe that will come out at some point. But yeah, I I just didn't really get this one. And I think it was maybe a me problem. Maybe I should have read the first book, but I wasn't going to do that. Sorry. And then lastly, I thought we would end on a high. This is the only book I have physically, so I'm actually holding one up for once. This is Nuclear War, a Scenario by Annie Jacobsen. I thought this was absolutely excellent as a non-fiction. Some of my favourite non-fictions always seem to be ended up nominated for the Bally Gifford Prize. I think I'm going to do an individual video reading all of those because I think I would enjoy it so much. I'm pretty sure this was also on the Women's Prize for non-fiction, if I'm not wrong. Maybe, I'm not sure. We'll spring a video for that. And I thought this was absolutely excellent. This was really, really good. I gave this a 4.5. This is another, probably one of the 3 strongest out this video, and I do think it's my favourite of those 3. This was absolutely excellent. I started this out to listen to it via audio, but I will say there's a lot of numbers in here and I struggle to understand numbers audibly. So like if someone says like 10,562 kilometers, I would need to stop for a second and be like, okay, 10,560, okay, and like register the number, but then they've already moved on in audiobook form, if that makes sense. I would need to like picture the number in my head to understand it, which sounds weird, but like in a book it's fine because they've actually got the number. I will say at the start she like mentions every single person that she spoke to, and it says like Colonel Julian Chestnut, PhD, Defense Clandestine Service, Defense Intelligence Agency, US Defense, blah 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 blah. So that was a lot to listen to via audio. And then each of the chapters are kind of split up. There aren't really chapters, there's more like sections, and then each section's kind of split up with 4 minutes 30 seconds Stratcom Headquarters, Nebraska, and then a bit later 23 minutes 30 seconds National Military Command Center, Pentagon, and there's only like that much, and then it moves on to the next section. So for me, I did decide to pick up the book and I did enjoy it a lot. There's also pictures in here, and I realized I've not actually explained what this book is. So basically Annie Jacobsen has done a bunch of interviews with kind of US officials, talked to kind of people that were working in defense, been able to access documents and stuff, and she's basically put together a kind of second by second, minute by minute almost story of what would happen if a nuclear war started. And in this scenario, I believe there's a missile from North Korea, and then the US like has to decide whether to send one back and stuff, and it's all happening within, because I think it's about 20 minutes between a missile being fired from North Korea and when it would land in the US, and it's really, really interesting. I can understand like the existential threat vibes would make this like not fun for a lot of people to read, but like I love the kind of intersection of like geography, politics, international relations, so this is so interesting to me. It's like right up my street. This basically follows the minute by minute scenarios. We follow kind of the president and kind of what those kind of strategies, plans are, people at different like radar sites, and we follow loads and loads of different kind of like aspects of it. Obviously certain aspects are fictionalized, like what the president says, obviously that's completely fictional, but the actual kind of plans that are in place are all what is planned. Basically, this was so interesting. I have never read a non-fiction that is such a page turner. I literally felt like I was reading a like political thriller. I felt like I was like flipping every page, like I was like, I can't wait to find out what happens next. I was getting tense. It was like intense to read. What I thought at first was kind of going to be a recap of like the strike and then kind of what would happen afterwards in terms of like the world and kind of like how like a nuclear winter would happen, etc, etc. But it's actually way less than that. I mean, like the first half of the book I think is like 24 minutes, and she goes into so much detail without it being boring, and it is just really, really fascinating. It's so fast paced as well, which I wasn't expecting, and yeah, I just thought it was really excellent. She has little kind of sections every now and again which are like, I guess, information sections. So this one's like history lesson number 8, and it's just got some information about like radiation sickness. She even goes as far to like kind of talk about the kind of options for the different plans and like kind of thinking about what the president would pick, the likelihood of like Russia or China or anything, like viewing it, how it would go, and it's just very, very tense. It was so good, and it is just really, really entertaining. And obviously it's like scary because obviously it could happen, but as a non-fiction, it's one of the most engaging non-fictions that I've read physically. I was really, really surprised by that because I mean, I enjoy reading non-fiction. My favorite way to consume it is audio, as you can probably tell, but I do really enjoy some non-fiction books that I have read physically, but it's never in a way of like, oh my god, I need to find out what happens next, like page turner. But like this honestly reads like a thriller at some points. I thought it was really, really good. This is another strong recommendation from me. So to round it out, this one, Sing Sing Files, and I Think I'm Sorry for Your Loss would be super strong recommendations from me. Those were my 3 favorites. I think Blood comes quite close to that as well, but I can understand why that would be less kind of universally enjoyed, just because it does get quite sciencey and quite specific at times. But if I had to kind of rank them in terms of my favorites, I'll put a little graphic up on the screen there so you can see. Obviously there were some that I didn't get to read that I did want to. I was really interested in the Alex Murdoch one because as much as I like don't love to engage with true crime, I I do think like rich people true crime is obviously very, very interesting. Obviously, like I mentioned, I couldn't find access to them, so sorry it's not like a fully conclusive all 20. I really hope you guys did enjoy this. Like I mentioned, I am going to be doing some more non-fiction videos and I'm really, really excited for them. I'm sitting on one already. I'm sitting on the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction one, which is basically kind of like this, and I'm also thinking of doing the Bally Gifford Prize like I mentioned. I think with non-fiction I really do enjoy kind of pulling from a kind of like award list. I'm definitely really, really excited to do more non-fiction content. I know a couple of you have mentioned it, so I'm really, really excited, but please don't worry if you do not like non-fiction. You probably haven't made it to this point if you don't like non-fiction, but it's probably only going to be like once a month or so, and lots of books in one video, so it's like concise, if that makes sense. I really hope you guys did enjoy this video. I know it's a little bit of a long one. I hope you had a fun time. If you did, don't forget to give it a like down below, hit subscribe and turn the bell to join a little club, and make sure you turn on all notifications, then you'll be notified every single time I post a new video. And if you want to watch one of my other videos, there'll be 2 on the screen now to pick from, as well as a linked up in the cards from earlier. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.